Eicha Yoshva Chavatzilis HaSharon, page 54 in the small Kinnos. Shekhinah speaks about Chesed and Tzedakah. But I'll say, Yalkut Shimoni, Choviv Olai Hagmilus Chasodim Shatim Gomlim, Yosem Mikol HaKorbono Shehikriv Shlomo. Milus Chasodim, Tzedakah, there's an aspect in it that is greater than Korbanos. Chazal say, Kol HaGomel Chesed Kilu Molde B'chol HaNisim She'osa HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'ol Tzionu L'Mitzrayim B'chol She'ino Gomel Chesed Kilu Kofer. Chesed has an idea of Emunah, Hakaras Hashem. Through Chesed, a person comes to feel the Rabbanu Shalom. And therefore Avram Avinu was at the same time the Amud HaEmunah, Rosh HaMaminim, and he was also the Amud of Chesed. Chesed and Emunah, Chesed and the ability to see the Rabbanu Shalom and feel the Rabbanu Shalom go together. One reason is, as Rabbi Chanan says in Kovitz Mamorim, Lo sasuru achri levadchem v'acharei neichem levadchem is minus. When does a person not see the Rabbanu Shalom? When he has negias. He goes after his own heart, his own subjectivity. Shamshon Paul Hirsch says the mitzvah emunah is not the knowledge that there's a God. Everybody has that knowledge. It's inborn in a person. The feeling that there must be a God. Look around. Look at the world. From the world you see the Creator. It's inherent in the Bria. The mitzvah is not the knowledge that there's a God. The mitzvah is the acknowledgement. It's accepting it. People blind their eyes from seeing the truth because they are subjective. They're navuah. They have their own subjectivity and negias. And therefore a person who's a Baal Chesed, who can give, not be a taker, somebody who can divest himself of his own subjectivity and think of others. The Balei Musar say, what's the difference between a window and a mirror? A window, you see the whole world. In a mirror, you just see yourself. There's a difference between them, a little silver, a little kesef. That's the difference. Little negias. You put that silver on the glass, and it becomes a mirror. Take away the silver, you can see the whole world. In addition, a Baal Chesed is a person who is Dom El Hashem, because the foundation of all the midos of the Rabbanu Shalom, Olam Chesed Yibana, the whole reason the Rabbanu Shalom created the world is because he wanted to give, he wanted to be a Baal Chesed. So a person who's a Baal Chesed is similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you're similar to him, then you can appreciate him and you can understand him. Michtam Eliyahu says the whole idea of Chesed is to be a giver and not a taker. And Chaim Shmulevitz says that's why ribis is such a terrible thing. Because ribis, a person is a giver, he loans somebody money, but he transforms himself from a giver into a taker by taking ribis. Here a person had an opportunity to be a giver, and instead of being the giver, he transformed that giving into taking. And that doesn't mean that a person should never take. There are times where taking is tantamount to giving. One is where a person takes in order to be able to give. If you don't have the wherewithal to give, you have nothing to give. So sometimes a person has to take what's rightfully coming to him in order to be able to give to others. I remember when I was a teenager, the Alter Satmar Rebbe, Yoel, used to come to Miami in the winter. And a few times we went to see him. And I remember seeing he wore this big robe, and the pockets of the robe were overflowing with money. Not dollar bills, $100 bills. And I thought to myself, I think when I grow up I'm going to be a Rebbe. This looks like... And then I saw that people would come to him and pour out their hearts to him, and he put his hand into the pocket, take out a handful of bills without even looking what it was, and hand it to the person. Until the pockets were empty and more people came and asked for brachas and gave kvitlach and gave him money, and he filled the pockets again. Did anybody say that the Satmar Rebbe was a taker? He was a clearinghouse. He didn't have any money of his own. So people gave him, and with that he gave other people who needed. So taking like that is called giving. Another way of taking that's giving is to honor somebody by taking from them. Somebody wants to give you something and he wants the covet of having you take it from him. The sugya of Adam Choshuv and Git and Kedusha. Woman can give an Adam Choshuv money, and with that hanoah that he accepted it from her and gave her the covet, he's makadosh her. Sometimes to accept something from somebody. When I became a Rav, I wanted to be a big tzaddik. And I made up my mind that I'm not going to accept any presents from anybody. And people like to give rabbis presents. You know, they come back from Eretz Yisroel, then I was in Miami. They bring the present for the rabbi. They want to give the rabbi a present for Purim or for Chanukah. So I decided, look, I get a salary, Soni Matonos Yichye, I'm not going to accept any presents. And I politely told people that I appreciate your consideration, but I can't take the present. This went on for about 6 months. So one of my older balabatim came to me one day and said, Rabbi, excuse me, I'm going to be very blunt with you. You think you're a big tzaddik, that you don't accept presents, but you're insulting these people by not accepting their presents. They want the covet of you accepting presents from them, and you're telling them that your presents aren't important to me. Take it. What you'll do with it is your business. But at least give them the covet of taking it. You didn't have to convince me. From then on, I took presents. It's right. Sometimes you can take something, and your intention is not to take. Your intention is to give the other person the covet of receiving something from them. And the last possibility of taking, being giving, is if in any relationship one side is always the giver and never wants to be the taker, then they're resigning the other side of being the taker and never being the giver. Usually in a family, there is a personality that by nature always wants to be the giver and never the taker. It's called a Jewish wife, Jewish mother. Right? She always wants to be a martyr. She always wants to give, never take anything. Right? Sit down to eat. There could be tons of food and 3 people at the table. And the wife says, no, I don't want to eat. Give it to my children. I mean, give it to your children. Give it to an army. She has to be a martyr. Somebody who doesn't want for herself, only for her husband or her children. And that's very nice, but it's not very nice. Because if in a relationship one side never wants to take, then they don't afford the other side of being a giver. Sometimes you have to take in order to enable the other person to be able to give. But a person has to have that desire to be a giver. Sometimes you have to receive to be a giver. But that should be the sonei matonos. It doesn't say einu mekabel matonos yichya. Somebody who doesn't accept presents. Somebody who hates the concept of taking. Sometimes you have to accept. Sometimes you have to receive. But you're not doing it because you love taking. It's because that is an expression of giving sometimes too. But he wants to give the schus to the rich people to be able to have that schus of supporting them. It's not for the sake of the ani. It's absurd to think that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives extra money to somebody so he can give it to the ani. Cut out the middleman. Give it directly to him. Have to give it to the usher. Sake is not for the ani. The ani the Rebbeinu Shalom can take care of. It's for the sake of the usher. And that's what Chazal say, that Rus told Naomi, the man I did for today, what she did for him, she took his matnas aniyah, but she did him a favor, because the Rebbeinu could have given her the money. But only she could give Boaz that schus of being able to give tzedakah. The Chafetz Chaim says the same thing applies to supporting Torah. There are people who think they're doing the Torah institutions a favor by supporting them. For those people, people who support Torah and think they're doing the Torah institutions a favor, they're fortunate, they'll get schar. But for them it's not an Eitz Chaim. Who's an Eitz Chaim for? Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim. Eitz Chaim says the word lahachazik means to hold on to something for dear life. When you're drowning and a log floats by and you hold on to it for dear life, that's called lahachazik, to hold on. Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim. The Torah is an Eitz Chaim l'machazikim for people who support it and understand that they're supporting themselves. Ha'aron nosi es nosa. The people who carried the Aron were in fact carried by the Aron. Famous Telzer Maisa. Blazer Gordon, the founder of Telzer Yeshiva. So when he got married, his father-in-law was a Rav, an Asheshok, Avram Yitzchok Neviezer. So he wanted to support his son-in-law for the first 5 years of their marriage, because he saw that he could become one of the Gedolah Yisrael, which eventually he did. So in those days, supporting did not mean buying him an apartment and a Cadillac and taking care of all his luxurious needs. It meant that the chassan and his wife could eat at the table of the father-in-law and live in their home, so he wouldn't have to have the expenses of paying for a family. That's what it meant. And sharing the same low level of existence that the father-in-law lived. That was called Sidur Malay in those days. In any case, so they were supported by the father-in-law for 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, they had a few children, and it was much more expensive to keep them, and the father-in-law was not a rich man. And the Reb Blazer was offered a rabbanus. And he told his wife, look, the time has come for us to go out and support ourselves, not to depend on your parents. And I have an offer of a rabbanus, which I want to take, so please go to your father and ask for his bracha that we should be able to leave. She went to her father and she told him, and he turned white, and he said, no way. You have to stay another 5 years. She went back to her husband and said, my father won't give his bracha to leave. He wants us to stay another 5 years. He said, look, I feel uncomfortable living off your father. Things were very much different those days. He felt uncomfortable. And I think that we should go out and make it on our own. But your father was so good to us for 5 years. If it means so much to him, we'll stay another 5 years. We stayed another 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, he already had a growing family, and he was offered a very prestigious rabbanus, which he really wanted to take. And he asked his wife to go again and tell her father that it's time for them to leave. She wants a bracha. At this time, the mother-in-law was there too. So she said, we've been here for 10 years. We know that it's difficult for you to support us, and we want your bracha to leave. And the wife turned to her husband. She said, she's right. How long can we support them? And the father turned to her and said, I don't know who's supporting who, but I can't hold back my son-in-law. I give him my bracha. He should go and be matzliach. The day they left, the father-in-law died. And then they understood what he meant. I don't know who's supporting who. Somebody who thinks when they're supporting Torah, they're doing a favor to the Torah, doesn't understand that basically they're supporting themselves. The Chafetz Chaim believed that, because somebody once came to the Chafetz Chaim and offered to underwrite the entire deficit of Yeshiva's Rafi. Whatever the Chafetz Chaim could raise, he would raise. Whatever he couldn't raise, this man would make up the deficit, pay for the entire budget of Yeshiva's Rafi. The Chafetz Chaim said, "I'm sorry, but I can't accept your offer." The man says, "Something wrong with my money? Why can't you accept the offer?" He said, "Because the truth is the Ribbono Shel Olam could support me and underwrite the entire budget of Yeshiva's Rafi, so why doesn't he? Because he wants Klal Yisrael to have the schus of supporting my yeshiva. I can't let you take that schus for yourself. You have to be able to share it with others. I'm waiting for somebody to offer me this. I will have failed in the soil. Hands down." But the Chafetz Chaim believed it. And therefore, giving the money, the tzedakah, the chesed is not the ikr. The ikr is avas chesed. The ikr is the sefer ponim yafos, how you give that tzedakah with happiness. I always want to explain, that's why the cycle of Meiser Oni and Meiser Sheni doesn't seem to make sense. Every 3 years, except for Shemitah, there's a cycle. The first 2 years you give Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni, and the third year, instead of Meiser Sheni, you give Meiser Oni. First 2 years, the second Meiser goes to you. Bring it to Yerushalayim, you enjoy it. 2 years you do that. The third year, that Meiser, which you, instead of bringing to Yerushalayim and eating it yourself, you give to Aniyim. It would seem to me, it make more sense that the first 2 years you should give it to the Oni, 2/3 of the time to the Oni. And if you're a nice guy and you've given the Oni for 2 years, God gives you a special prize. This year you can keep it for yourself, bring it to Yerushalayim and eat it. But 2 years for yourself and only 1 year for the Oni? And the first 2 years for yourself and only the third year for the Oni? Well, that's the idea. The Ribbono Shel Olam says, the Aniyim don't need your money, I can support them. But I want you to be happy in giving it. So I want you to practice 2 years to take your money and do what I tell you to do with it. You should know it's not your money, it's my money. And if I tell you to take it to Yerushalayim and eat it there and you can't eat it at home, then that's what you have to do with it. And you'll enjoy it. You'll be happy with using your money the way I tell you to use it. And if after 2 years you learn the lesson, then the third year you can give it to the Oni and be happy about giving it to him too. But it's more important to me that you're happy to give it than that the Oni gets the money. I'll take care of the Oni. I want to make sure that you have the schus. That's why they say that the example of chesed, achnosus orchim in the Torah, is Avram Avinu with the Malachim. Because the Malachim didn't need his achnosus orchim. They gained nothing from it. They just made it look like they were eating. What do they have to do with food? So the whole example of chesed is where the person really doesn't need the chesed. You're doing it because it's supposed to the person who's doing the chesed. That's what we learn from Avram Avinu. What chesed is being sensitive to other people, to being a person who doesn't consider themselves but considers somebody else, because when you're sensitive and you're not concerned only with yourself, then you can see the Ribbono Shel Olam. That's why tzedakah and chesed is greater than korbanos. Korbanos are a korban. They bring you closer to the Ribbono Shel Olam. They let you see the Ribbono Shel Olam. When you don't only see yourself in that mirror, then you can see the Ribbono Shel Olam too. That's why it says that Rebbetzin Simcha Wasserman once said that she was hoping that she would die first and not have to, they didn't have any children, and she was hoping that her husband wouldn't have, and his wife would go around every month and collect the rent from people. If he knew that somebody couldn't pay the rent, he would go the day before and give the people money so they would have money to pay the wife the next day. So losing proposition. He was paying the rent for the people. He was supposed to be making money on the rent, but he didn't want to embarrass them. He didn't want that the wife should know that they were receiving tzedakah. So he would go give them the money privately, and the next day they could pay the rent to the landlord, to the wife, and her not knowing that really the money was coming from their other pocket. So Maisa with the Rav Trenk from Philadelphia. What it means to be sensitive, even when it comes to giving tochacha. It's also chesed. And a bocher in the yeshiva one day showed up with flip-flops, with sandals that grout socks, where your toe fits into a one thing in the middle of the shoe, the middle of the sandal. He wasn't wearing socks, sitting there sitting Seder without socks. So Trank went over to him. He says, "What happened to your socks?" He said, "Rebbe, I'm wearing these new fangled sandals, flip-flops, and you can't wear socks with them because they have to fit between your toes, right, in that thing that holds them on, and you can't obviously wear a sock." 10, 15 minutes later, a train comes back and he says, "I brought you a pair of socks." He says, "But Rebbe, I told you, I can't wear socks with these flip-flops." He said, No. I went home, got your pair of socks, and I cut a hole in between the place where the big toe goes and the rest of the toes, so you can wear these socks with your flip-flops also. Instead of giving him mussar or throwing him out of the base medrash, be a little bit sensitive. The boy wanted to wear these flip-flops, but to sit in the Seder with bare feet. So he found an eitzah, how to wear flip-flops with socks if you make the socks fit the flip-flops. The mice I saw, somebody ran a clothing gemach, grew into a whole operation, a whole store in Baltimore, where people could come and get clothing at almost nothing, totally reduced prices, things that were donated or whatever, and they could feel the COVID. They sold these things at reduced prices, they were subsidized, and Aniyim could come and feel they were shopping. They weren't getting a handout. The Gemach became a store, and you checked out or whatever, but the prices were unbelievably low. And it took a lot to support this undertaking. The person had an offer from a Tzedakah organization who would underwrite $150,000 towards the building, the mortgage, whatever it may be, with one condition: that on the walls of the building it would say that it was sponsored, donated by this and this tzedakah. He was ready to take the offer, and a friend of his said, "How could you do that?" He said, "People come here and buy the clothes. They think they're doing it because they're buying in a store with reduced prices, and it gives them a certain covet, a certain self-respect, that they're not taking tzedakah. If on this wall will be the name of a tzedakah, right, people are going to feel they're coming and getting a handout. They're going to feel very, very much like they're never." The guy said, "Yeah, but $150,000, how can I just turn it down? The whole kiyum of this tzedakah enterprise may depend on it." He says, "I've thought about it. I'll give you the money in order that you shouldn't have to put on the building that it comes from tzedakah. People should come and be able to get their tzedakah and feel mechubed, not feel that they're nebuchs and that they're getting a handout."